Welcome, fine folks of the internet, to another episode of Rules Bites here on Myth Brigade. Now, I'm Jason, and I'm going to be your host, or Marshall, for the third installment in our series focused on Savage Worlds Adventure Edition from Pinnacle Entertainment. Now, in this delicious piece of instructional cinema, we're going to take a gander at the game's rules for fighting, shooting, hurting, and dying, and their clever take on who gets to do what first.
That's called initiative.
I know that. Now, a couple of you have observed that since Savage Worlds is a generic system that can work in pretty much any setting, that I should be changing out my accent and look accordingly. Trouble is, after a bad spell of diet and video games during COVID, my combat fatigues don't fit too well. I let my friend borrow my chainmail, and them vac suits, damn, they chafe like a sumbitch. Point here is that you remember all rules in Savage Worlds are easily adopted to any setting you have in mind. So with that, let's saddle up and talk about some violence. Violence! 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 Now, I've broken our coverage of Adventure Edition combat into 3 quick episodes: Initiative and Attacks, Damage and Healing, and a bonus episode that covers some special combat situations. Now, there are few words that inspire the kind of dread and excitement as when a GM says, "All right, everyone, roll for initiative." In Savage Worlds, initiative takes the form of action cards, a dice-free system based on a standard set of playing cards with both jokers left in. When a combat round begins, the GM deals a card to each wild card, so player characters and key allies or villains, and then a single card for the extras on each side of the conflict. This makes it a lot easier if you've got situations where there's a lot of mobs. This starts the countdown from ace down to 2. Suits are generally ignored unless there's a tie. In that case, the tie is resolved in suit order, so spades, hearts, diamonds, and clubs. So let's say we have a situation like this. Bill goes first because he has an ace. Kim goes next because she has the queen. Blart the Rot King and Ryan, though, both have a 7, so that means we need to look at the suit. Sadly, Ryan loses when we compare his clubs to Blart's diamonds. And Blart's minions are going to bring up the rear after drawing a 2 of spades. Characters with edges like quick or level-headed should make any desired changes to their card before the countdown begins and characters start taking their turns. Characters that draw jokers are allowed to act whenever they wish, even if that means jumping in front of another character or a villain. Players, just be respectful when deciding to inject your turn and try not to interrupt the action or dialogue between another player and the GM.
You hear the sound of revolvers scraping leather as they slip free from their holsters. Seems Billy Kincaid and his henchmen are ready for this confrontation. Petey, you're first up in initiative. What are you going to do?
I'm going to take both barrels of my shotgun and give old Billy an enema.
All right then, I'm going to need it.
Dude, wait. I got a joker. My turn.
GMs, you can make this a little bit easier by checking in with players holding jokers as you move from one turn to the next, or by using a silent queuing system like the toss of the joker into the discard pile as a signal that the player's ready to act. Now remember that players holding jokers also get a +2 bonus to any trait and damage rolls during that round. With our initiative order decided, the combat round begins. As in many RPGs, each player may use his or her turn to move a given distance and perform some sort of action. And this could be the use of a power, attacking an enemy, or any number of real-world activities. Regular actions are typically resolved with a trait roll, modified with an appropriate bonus or penalty based on the situation, and then compared to some target number, usually 4.
4.
Outside of regular actions, there are a few others to consider. Now, some actions require little enough effort that they only consume a fraction of time in a player's turn. These are called free actions and include such things as dropping an item, shouting a warning to an ally, falling prone, or anything else that can be done very quickly with little or no preparation and no concentration. Now players, your GM does have the final say on what is and is not a free action, and really as to how many you can get in one single turn. GMs, be aware here, this can be pretty slippery.
All right, Bob. Wilbur's up next. What do you do?
Okay, I'm gonna take a knee. I think I'm gonna get some chewing tobacco. I'm gonna cock my gun. I'm gonna spit. Then I'm gonna stand up. I think I'll straighten my belt. I'll shout a warning over to Bart. And then I think, then what I'm gonna do is aim,
Some actions are complex and require multiple steps. So think about cracking a bank safe, or maybe mixing up some sort of healing salve from some herbs that are in your saddlebag. These things take time. Depending on the situation, a given complex action can actually take longer than other situations. So to handle this, the GM can set a number of rounds or call for a random roll. Now I favor the latter, allowing the character a chance to just speed through a task with legendary fashion, or creep laughably along as the rounds wear on. Savage Worlds allows every character to take up to 3 regular actions per turn. Now going beyond one action does incur a stacking -2 penalty to all actions for that turn. So it's -2 if you choose 2 actions, and if you go for the maximum, it's a whopping -4. Players wishing to do this have to declare all actions in advance, thereby setting the penalty for that turn. Now if they change their mind and stop the action chain for some reason, the penalties still remain.
But I just realized I'm only rolling 1d4.
Some actions are really reactions, like a roll required to resist a spell, or maybe an opposed strength roll to avoid falling down when someone shoves you. These occur whenever appropriate to resolve a situation, and are not really limited to a specific number during a round. Though, if a hero is having to make more than, say, 3 or 4 resistance rolls per round, the rest of the party's either dead, or your encounter might be way out of balance. Let's talk about movement. The distance our old friend Earl can move is based on his pace score. This value represents the number of inches he can move on the tabletop while still performing an action. Note that an inch is typically a single square on a proper battle map, representing something like 5 to 6 feet in real-world space, depending on the map designer. So if you're playing more in the theater of the mind, Earl's pace of 6 would get him about 36 feet of distance. Now this assumes that Earl is up, on his feet, and unhindered. Special types of movement like swimming, climbing, or crawling consume twice as much pace. So for example, Earl can only swim 3 inches, or 3 squares, with his pace of 6. Once per combat turn, a hero can choose to run as a free action. Now, doing this will actually increase Earl's pace for that round by his running die, which is 1d6. Now I love this approach as opposed to other systems. So instead of just doubling the pace, the running die adds a great representation of how tough combat movement can really be. So sometimes you get just as far, just as fast as you'd hoped. Other times the chaos of combat slows you down or blocks your run entirely. Now keep in mind, the running die does not ace. When not in combat, running is handled a little differently. So here, Earl can run twice the sum of his pace, plus the maximum number for his running die. So that's 12 plus 6 for a total of 18. This speed can be maintained for a number of minutes equal to about half his vigor. Now, sadly for Earl, this is only 2. So he's only going to be able to sprint for 2 minutes before he needs a serious breather.
Wait just a minute. We'll get back to find it.
Now sometimes there are going to be dangers involved with a player's choice of movement. This could be hazardous terrain or something about the conditions under which the character is moving. So maybe Earl is attempting to navigate a steep incline during a rock slide, or swim upstream in some dangerous rapids. Maybe he's decided to walk along a narrow ledge slippery with mud. In any case, the GM should represent these challenges with an athletics roll, modified for just how tough the situation is. Now, success means the character's move goes as planned. Failure means there's some form of complication. Critical failure results in fatigue or damage to the character. You can find pointers to specifics on this on page 92. Now, a couple of quick hits on other types of movement. So silly. Characters can jump 1 inch horizontally or half that vertically as a free action. If the character has at least a 2-inch or 4-yard head start, that distance is doubled. Now, players can push a horizontal jump with an athletics roll, adding another inch if successful, or 2 inches if there's a raise involved. The benefits of that roll to a vertical jump are halved. Now, crafty players note, jumping cannot be used to extend characters' normal pace. Characters may fall prone as a free action at any time during their turn. Once prone, crawling is allowed at half the total pace. Standing is a free action, but then reduces the pace for the rest of the turn by 2. So GMs, be sensible here. Too much adherence to these rules during a complex movement can really wet down the narrative. My recommendation is to use them only when precision will actually help move the story along or create a more memorable challenge for the player. Though there are a few rules that extend the model, Savage Worlds attacks can be summed up in the usual 2 types: melee attacks and ranged attacks. For a melee attack, the player makes a fighting roll, modifies it as appropriate, and then compares the result to the target's parry score. If the result is equal to or greater than that parry score, the attack is a hit. If not, the target's assumed to have fended the attack off. Now, GMs, this is a great opportunity to add a little bit of flavor to combat. Does he parry with his own melee weapon, or block the punch with his arm, duck out of the way as the sword woofs above his head? Use your imagination and take the time to create a scene based on the dice results.
I'm sorry, John. That total was less than 4. So your attempt to punch him in the face fails. Dobbs, what do? You reach back with everything you've got. Give him a right hook. He ducks at the very last minute, though, and you connect with his hat, sending it flying across the bar. Dobbs, what do?
For a ranged attack, the player makes a shooting roll. Now, this covers any type of projectile weapon, whether it be modern, like a laser pistol, or a blaster, a 9mm, a submachine gun, shotgun, cannon. You get the idea. Or even primitive weapons like longbows, slings, or crossbows. Athletics is used for thrown weapons like grenades, shuriken, or knives. As with skill rolls, these attacks are made against a set target number, typically 4. Rolls equal to or greater than the target number are a hit. As with any RPG, range affects the difficulty of hitting targets. The penalties for this are -2 for medium range, -4 for long range, and a whopping -8 for extreme. Now, extreme range can't even be attempted without using the aim option, which we'll discuss later. That doesn't even help with the penalty. For that, you're going to need to use a scope. It's just really the only way a character has a chance at hitting a target at that range.
Go on, Earl. Shoot him. Shoot him? I can barely see this son of a bitch, much less shoot him.
Weapons with a rate of fire of 2 or more actually allow a player to fire multiple shots in a single action. A shooting roll is then made for each shot, with a recoil from the automatic fire causing a -2 penalty to each roll. Before rolling, a player must designate how many rounds he or she is attempting to put into a specific target. Oh, and wild cards get to add their wild die to each shooting roll. Once the rolls are made, the player can assign successes as desired. I know, it's really not that bad. So say Earl is attempting to spray a group of enemies with a Gatling gun, which has a rate of fire of 3. He chooses to put 2 shots in what he thinks is the leader of the group, and a third in the nearest henchman. With this declared, he makes his shooting rolls, applying the -2 penalty to account for the weapon's recoil. His rolls wind up as 6, 7, and 3, 2 hits. Considering how badly Earl wants El Capitan dead, he's going to put both successes into him and proceed to resolve the damage. Now, the rate of fire isn't really a representation of the actual number of bullets involved. So when you're calculating ammo, you're going to need to consult the table on page 93. Earl's attack, for example, would have used 10 bullets. Now keep in mind, this is factored into the weapon's damage, so you don't really need to roll damage per bullet. It's just per shot. A final word here. Sometimes a character might want to fire fewer shots than a weapon permits. This is possible unless the weapon's description says otherwise. Pay close attention to the tables beginning on page 73 for more details. All right, you are now ready to orchestrate combat with card-based initiative, move your heroes and bad guys all over the place, and adjudicate those kicks, punches, bites, stabs, and blasts all day long. In our next bite, we're going to take a look at Adventure Edition's way of handling damage and healing, which I think is one of the system's biggest strengths. No more hit points. No more hit points. No more hit points! If you found this episode helpful or just had a really good time, please click that like button and leave us a comment below. Your support does a ton to help keep us in the YouTube algorithm and to help us grow the channel. We really appreciate it. Subscribe and click the bell to stay up to date with new episodes of Rules Bites, live game sessions, product reviews, industry interviews, and so much more. Until next time, though, let's talk to Philosophical Undead Cowboy.
You ever find yourself in a hole? First thing you ought to do is stop digging.